On this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, it remains quiet on the Memphis free agency front heading in to a 4th of July holiday. What does that mean for the Grizzlies? Does it mean anything for the Grizzlies? Are you as impatient as some members of the social media fan base? Summer League schedule is official and it is out both for Salt Lake City and for Las Vegas. What are some of our takeaways from that? And then Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN said something interesting on Tuesday that I want to pick Damichael Cole's brain on. Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. Could he be a fit with the core of the Memphis Grizzlies? All that and more on this Locked In episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is the 4th of July Eve, and it's an exciting time here in America. America's been taking a lot of losses lately, not going to lie, not to get too political. More so on the soccer side, right? It just feels like things aren't going great. I think Simone Biles will help right the ship here in a few weeks.
Yeah, the Olympics will help.
Watching Olympic trials, I think she's going to, just completely dominate everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the picture of her, Damichael, like 12 feet in the air?
She floats. She literally is she's a
highlight reel. A lot of fun to watch.
I can't wait to see her in Paris. I can't wait.
Absolutely. So anyway, I think we're going to turn it around here in these next few weeks, but not the best time for the United States for a variety of reasons. But it's a great time to be on Locked On Grizzlies. It's a great time to have you with me, Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, and with my co-host, Damichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning beat writer covering the Memphis Grizzlies for that publication. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can find Locked On Grizzlies. And we are so grateful for the continued strong showing. Another really good episode yesterday on YouTube and on all our podcast channels. So continue to help us build Locked On Grizzlies, spread the good news that is Damichael and I's coverage of the Memphis Grizzlies on this here podcast. We appreciate it. Damichael, another day, more radio silence, right? We'll talk about Adrian Wojnarowski saying something in passing that was pretty interesting to me at the end of the show. But nothing really to report from Memphis in terms of what their roster is going to be. Now, they did announce their official summer league schedule. We'll talk about that. I did notice there's a little bit more national TV love than I think folks originally thought there might be, probably because of the Zach Edey effect, now that it's known that Edey is going to be there with Memphis as opposed to Team Canada. But I continue to wonder, and it's becoming a larger dividing point on social media, Damichael.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Memphis kind of is what they are, right? And you either believe in this core or you don't. Others would counter that point saying that they don't believe in the pieces around the core. Like I've seen people talk about being concerned about Brandon Clark, the lack of shooting, the lack of a true big beyond Edey, how heavy this roster is on wings. You talked about that on yesterday's show.
Yep.
And obviously, Luke Kennard is still not a member of the Memphis Grizzlies.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a case of Memphis moving methodically at their own pace, just kind of be patient? Are you starting to wonder what's going on at 191 Beale Street? How do you feel about the current state of play with Memphis in this free agency period? We've gone through a few days now and no real movement.
Everyone just breathe in, breathe out.
Like we say with the FanDuel ads, the sports aren't sportsing as much, so people are impatient.
Yeah, just calm down. It's not much to it. I mean, there's two ways. We can do the macro and the micro view here. And on a larger scale, no one in the NBA is making a lot of moves right now. Look around. I mean, the 76ers.
The second apron has folks shook.
The
Mob Deep is calling everybody halfway crooks.
The first apron has them shook because there are certain moves you can't make that will put you in the first apron that will hard cap teams. I know a lot of people don't understand what being hard capped means, but historically there haven't been too many teams that have been hard capped. It's much easier to get hard capped now, and case in point, let's say the Grizzlies were hard capped this past season. They wouldn't have been able to sign 31, 32 guys. Because when you're hard capped, there's a number. You can't go over it no matter what. If guys get hurt, you're down to 11 men. If another guy gets hurt, you're down to 10 men. You cannot surpass that hard cap number. No ifs and buts about it. That's a scary sight for a lot of teams, for a lot of franchises. So with all that being said, it's the first apron, it's the second apron, it's the idea that signing trades, trading players using certain mid-level exceptions and things like that will hard cap teams and whatnot. But then get into the Grizzlies side of it, right? We've talked about this for months. When you get into this offseason, there are a couple decisions that were going to take care of themselves. Yuta Watanabe, Lamar Stevens, those have taken care of themselves. Then there was the Luke Kennard team option. Still, with all of that being factored in, there's a lot of roster space right now. You have to sign a first-round pick, which is Zachy, and that's going to be a standard deal. And you right now, with the way everything's shaping up, Jalen Wells is potentially going to be on a standard deal. And then let's say if Luke Kennard is to return, that's your 15 right there. Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, Luke Kennard. They take up the 3 spots of the guys who are no longer the 2 guys that are no longer here, plus Luke Kennard returning. So now you're seeing a situation where all 15 of your standard roster spots are taken. Okay, well, what about the 2-ways? Scottie Pippen Jr., he's on a 2-way. He signed a multi-year 2-way deal when he came here, so he's still on a 2-way. Trey Jemison signed a multi-year 2-way deal. He's still on a 2-way. You only get 3 of them. The third spot, Cam Spencer, your other second-round pick, he's going to occupy that one. So now you got a situation where you got 3 guys on 2-ways, you got 15 guys, 14, and then, of course, we'll see how the Luke Kennard situation plays out. But that's part of this free agency front while the Grizzlies are quiet. So, Joe, I like to think of it like this. There's some movement that needs to be made on the roster in order to create the space to be more aggressive in free agency. But those things don't just happen overnight. If you want to trade players under contract, for example, and you're going to have to probably attach assets on top of that, teams have to agree to that. And you only have a certain amount of teams that you can even do that with. Like, as of right now, I think there are only like 6 teams in the NBA with cap space, and only 2 teams, I think Detroit and Utah, have a considerable amount of cap space where they could easily take on a John Konchar's contract or Zaire Williams' contract or someone like that. So the point is, you shouldn't have expected much from the Grizzlies coming into this offseason just because of the roster layout. The rotation is pretty much taking care of itself for the most part. There are going to probably be a couple moves along the margins. We'll see if they can shed salary somewhere in order to get this Luke Kennard thing worked out. But that's the situation now, Joe. They're not in the situation where they have 5 open roster spots and they can go out and sign a bunch of different guys.
I am as guilty as anybody of the trade machine stuff, right? I could sit here all day. Maybe this is, when we get into the dog days of the offseason in August. I could sit here and give you all sorts of John Konchar, Zaire Williams, and 2 first-round pick trades. It takes 2 to tango, dear listener, dear viewer. And if you don't have a partner that is willing to take on those contracts, is not happy to do that unless there are considerable draft capital assets attached, no matter what you dream up in the trade machine, there is no possibility for you to improve. And we have to remember who we're talking about. The Memphis Grizzlies, who zig when everybody else zags. The Memphis Grizzlies, who are proud of the culture they've built. The guys that are in the system have been a part of that culture or are young enough, like their new draft picks, to be malleable within the culture. You're not going to bring in DeMar DeRozan and say, come on in, DeMar, right? I feel like that's somebody that, you're not going to go big name hunting. You're not going to look at the Klay Thompson deal and see that they essentially got him for peanuts from the Golden State Warriors in Dallas and say, oh, well, the Grizzlies could have done that. Well, Klay Thompson has to want to be here. DeMar DeRozan has to want to be here. The Memphis Grizzlies, I think, are better equipped than any front office that Memphis has had. They understand that. And you need a certain type of guy that wants to be here. And that takes time to find, and that also takes the right amount of opportunity cost. What is it worth to you? Let's say DeMar DeRozan did want to be here. Okay, you're going to have to move on from Marcus Smart. Is that worth it? You have to debate that. You have to have conversations internally. You want another big? That's fine. Mo Wagner just went off the board in free agency back to the Orlando Magic. That was a guy that I talked about on our most recent episode as a free agency wish. But if that guy doesn't want to be here, there's levels to this. We assume so much when it comes to this stuff, and there's just so much that we're not privy to.
Yeah, it's really that simple. At the end of the day, the way the CBA is designed now is more so for teams with 2 stars and put complementary pieces around it. I always ask myself, why did the players agree to this? But the only thing that I could come to is the players were thinking competitively. They were saying, hey, we're tired of the super team stuff. We want balance in the league. That's the only reason I can see the players agreeing to something like this, because you're taking money out of your pocket. For example, yes, PG just got $50+ million a year with Philly, but LA, the Clippers weren't going to offer him a comparable deal or even more money than that, which they could have, simply because they don't want to go into the second apron. That second apron is scaring teams. There are going to be other teams.
If the second apron didn't exist, Paul George would be a much wealthier man.
He'd be with the Clippers still. So they're taking money out of their pockets to insert to some of the players are, not all of them, but the star players in certain situations. I think you're going to see more situations like Paul George going forward. But yeah, as it pertains to the Grizzlies, it's quiet because there are certain limitations that we've touched on a lot. They come with the first apron, they come with the second apron. And you shouldn't be in a rush to deal with those things when right now you can pretty much comprise a good roster that can compete for a championship without dealing with those limitations.
Assuming that Luke Kennard is back, this is a 50-win team right now. Now, yeah. Even without a big man like we've talked about, and with all the fuss about how things have been going, they're a 50-win team right now, and that gets you into the playoffs. Now, where does that put you? In the Western Conference, you might be the 5 seed, you might be the 6 seed, but you're a 50-win team, and you're in the playoffs. And I think Memphis wants to get to that point, develop the guys that they've got, and roll the ball out in the first round against whoever it is, come what may. Is that right? Is that wrong? I guess we'll find out, and there will be people that are blamed and celebrated for whatever does indeed come of that. But they have a certain way of doing business. The exception is a Marcus Smart trade or a Tyus Jones signing. That's not usually how they operate. Still possible that happens, but again, precedent would tell us it's much more likely they go in the opposite direction and they stand pat for the most part. Let us know what you think in the comments. Hit us up. How do you feel about the quietness of the Memphis Grizzlies as of this recording, at least? Damichael and I could go to bed and we'll wake up to a Woj bomb or something at 5 a.m. But as of this recording, still pretty silent in Memphis. Obviously, no one's more tuned in than Damichael. He's not disagreeing with my assessment. How is that going to look to you? Let us know in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, some actual basketball being played starting next week, the Vegas Summer League. But before Vegas, it's Salt Lake City. All 7 games have been announced. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. I love Gametime, especially when it comes to summer baseball with MLB. Going to a game, for me, it would be the Washington Nationals. I'm guessing for Damichael, it would be the Atlanta Braves. Going and checking out your favorite team. For me, spending time with my family. First foul ball caught, eating a hot dog and some ice cream, whatever the case might be, in the little plastic helmets. You know what I'm talking about, with the little logo. Soft serve, mwah, chef's kiss, right? I promised I wouldn't do that anymore. I'm sorry. I'm looking forward to making memories, and I know that Gametime is going to help me do it, all right? You can use Gametime for all sorts of things like last-minute deals, saving up to 60% off buying for last-minute events like Major League Baseball games, but also concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Toggling all-in pricing will allow for you to see the total cost up front with no surprise fast fees at checkout. And Gametime provides the lowest price guarantee, or they will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will continue our conversation about Summer League. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I have been covering the Grizzlies here, there, and everywhere for over a decade. Between the two of us, you have come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. We are both patient with Memphis. We kind of understand how the Grizzlies operate at this point going into, I believe, year 6 of the Zach Kleiman, John Morant, Taylor Jenkins era. I could be mistaken on that.
Oh, you're right.
Right.
The years are moving on. Yeah.
Over half a decade now. Yeah, pretty remarkable. So we kind of know the score with these guys. Not too surprising that it's going a little bit slower. I know some folks are getting impatient. Something that you don't have to be impatient about is Summer League basketball. It is around the corner. Memphis, the last few years, has participated in the Salt Lake City version, right? The kind of tune-up before going into Vegas. Everybody participates in Vegas. But Memphis does the Salt Lake City Summer League, and then they go to Vegas after that. What are some takeaways for you, Damichael, from the schedule? My biggest takeaway was they start Monday, right, July 8th. They play the hosting Jazz, and the Sixers and the Thunder. They play 3 games in 3 nights. So obviously a guy like Zach Edey, I think you talked about on yesterday's show, maybe Edey plays Monday and Wednesday. He won't play that Tuesday game. But then you go to Vegas and you play the Kings, the Mavericks, the Magic, the Pelicans. Technically, by record this past season, the worst team on Memphis's schedule for Summer League is the Memphis Grizzlies. So you're not seeing any of these top picks. You're not seeing any of those guys. The best, in theory, pick that is available to watch in all these games is Zach Edey. That was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, you don't get any Bronny James.
Right.
But, I mean, the top of his draft class isn't just, it's not like you're missing, Victor Wembanyama from last year or anything. So, but yeah, that definitely stood out to me as well.
But like a Reed Shepherd, for example. To me, Reed Shepherd is somebody, as much as I hate him for how he got cooked by the Oakland Grizzlies, that's someone who I feel like is going to be fun to watch in Summer League, right? Like I'm going to have to go seek out a Houston Rockets game, assuming Reed Shepherd plays, and watch him play. I don't think that there's anybody really, and maybe you disagree with me. Obviously, there might be some second or third year guys that might check that box for these teams, but there's no other rookies aside from Edey that I really want to see.
Yeah, Edey is the rookie that I want to see the most. I mean,
and that would not have been the case last year if Wembanyama was on your schedule.
Yeah, right, at all. But it's an interesting slate of games or whatever. I want to see how well they're gonna do. The Summer League roster will be coming out here shortly. With the guys on it and whatnot. Like I said, we know some of the names that'll be on it. There'll be some names added to that as well. So that'll be interesting to see. Because from a competitive standpoint, I want to see how they're going to compete more than anything. This roster is very manageable. I think the Kings game is interesting because we don't know who's going to coach the Grizzlies Summer League yet as of this moment. But I think it'll be cool to let Anthony Carter coach it because his son. Maybe he gets to coach against his son. In that case, that'll be, fun to watch. But the Mavs, the Magic, the Pelicans, no standout rookies, from those squads. So the Grizzlies, honestly, I mean, we'll see how the rest of those teams shape their rosters out. But I expect them to be kind of dominant through this stretch.
Agreed. And that's one of the positive trade-offs, right? Like, I think you've talked about the potential starting lineup, Scottie Pippen, Cam Spencer, Jalen Wells, G.G. Jackson, Zach Edey.
Yeah, Trey Jemison off the bench. Yeah.
Assuming how they structure the roster around those guys and waiting to see how these other rosters shake out, like you alluded to, Memphis might go like 6-1, 7-0 because they are more youth heavy. Now, this might go back to our previous segment's point of are we quadrupling down on depth because we have all these young guys that are Summer League eligible. Like G.G. Jackson was all rookie this past season, but it makes sense for him to play Summer League because he's so young. Right?
And 3 of them are two-way guys, so it's a little different. And
that's
like
fair.
Last year you had, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, and all those guys down there. And like there was questions about whether Zaire should play as well. Like, and these are all rostered guys. So that was a little different.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. So I think for me, looking at the schedule, it's a lot of basketball in a short amount of time, right? I wouldn't expect to see Edey, maybe he plays 4 or 5 of these 7 games. But I do think that you will see a very interesting dynamic with whoever coaches the Grizzlies. I think that, the Lakers from afar, obviously, Memphis is their own, ecosystem. But the fact that JJ Redick is not coaching the Summer League team for the Lakers is fascinating to me. Yeah. Like you were literally calling you were calling the NBA Finals a month ago, dude, and you have never coached before, and now you're just not going to get those live reps in Summer League. coaches are allowed to do that, right? Like if it's your
Nick
first
Nurse
year,
Mm-hmm.
Nick Nurse, who was an experienced championship winning coach, did it for Philly. Yeah. I just think that's fascinating. Obviously, Redick will be there, but just the way that this summer league is going to shake out because of the fact that these draft classes are not as enticing. Obviously, I haven't followed the Spurs. I'm guessing Wembanyama's not playing summer league. I don't think he needs to, clearly. So my point is, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be lower on name recognition potentially, but for Memphis in particular, it's going to be higher in terms of they might be able to win this thing.
I can't wait to see that first game too. You know who's on Utah's summer league roster?
Oh, your boy Kenneth Lofton Jr. Yeah.
How about that? Zach Edey versus Kenneth Lofton Jr.
I wonder who's going to win that.
Let's get right into it. I want to see it. It'll be fun to watch.
Zach Edey is like 8 inches taller than Kenny Lofton Jr.
Look,
if Kenny Lofton Jr. gets off more than 2 shots, we'll come up with some sort of
pro. He's a pro, Joe. Come on.
Anytime Edey is on that dude and he's in the post, I'm not talking about open threes or shots on the perimeter. Anytime he's able to get off a shot on Edey on the block, I will be very impressed because I've watched that guy play. He's got moves. Don't get me wrong.
He went at Wemby.
It's a brick house.
But you're right. Edey is a different breed. I know he went at Wemby and Chet, but he's just a little bit stronger than those dudes. So I want to see it though. I just want to see what it looks like. It'll be a fun, polarizing matchup.
Edey's 7'4", 300 pounds, whereas Chet and Wembanyama are 7-footers that are like 220 pounds. It's going to be very different. But I agree with you. That'll be interesting to watch. Okay. Let us know what you're looking forward to with Summer League. Obviously, once the roster is finalized, Damichael and I will share our thoughts and all those sorts of things. But let us know in the comments how you're feeling about Summer League approaching. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this Wednesday episode. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, Damichael very tuned in with the Memphis Grizzlies. Nobody's more tuned into the NBA than Woj. And he said something pretty interesting on ESPN on Tuesday that I wanted to pick Damichael's brain on regarding one Lauri Markkanen and Memphis perhaps calling with interest in him in the last year or so. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, Damichael and I are having a wonderful conversation about the Grizzlies. We're not the only Locked On hosts that put on shows like this. Most, if not all, of the Locked On Podcast Network has nuanced, analytical conversations where we're not screaming at each other. This isn't Fox Sports. This isn't ESPN. This is Locked On Podcast Network stuff. And you can find the very best each and every day of the Locked On Podcast Network over at Locked On Sports Today. It's the first of its kind 24/7 streaming service over on YouTube. You can also check it out on Amazon Fire under the free TV channels app. Make sure you're going and looking for Locked On NBA, Locked On NFL, Locked On NHL. So many different ways to take in the Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On Grizzlies. And we're very excited about Locked On Sports Today. So make sure you're checking it out on YouTube or Amazon Fire. When we come back, Lauri Markkanen to Memphis? Probably not, but it's still fun to talk about. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Michael Cole, the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Very excited to be with Damichael on this episode, as always, and it's been a good show talking about Summer League, talking about the sloth's pace that Memphis is moving at and free agency and whether we should be concerned about that. Something that caught my ear when I was checking out ESPN on Tuesday, Damichael, was Adrian Wojnarowski saying that multiple teams have called on Lauri Markkanen in the past or even recently about his availability. It sounds like he's more available than he's ever been with Utah. Doesn't mean that old Danny Ainge over with the Jazz is not going to take a king's ransom for Lauri Markkanen. But maybe they're actually listening to offers. One of the names that Wojnarowski, I want to stress, he did make it sound like it was in the last 2 days. But in the past, one of the names that has been brought up as a team that has inquired about the availability of Lauri Markkanen is the Memphis Grizzlies. And let's say it costs the same as Mikal Bridges, right? We're talking 5 first-round picks. We're talking G.G. Jackson. There's all sorts of reasons why I wouldn't do this trade, right? I want to stress this isn't necessarily what I would do. But I'm curious as to how you would see his fit in Memphis, because this past season he played very limited reps at small forward. He was mostly a power forward for the Jazz. He's about 7 foot tall. Yeah. How would he fit now that you have Zach Edey, Jaren Jackson Jr.? Do you play him at the 3 if this was even possible? Do you entertain trades where you might be moving on from Bane or Jaren to save some draft capital. To me, that's a non-starter, right? I've got my 3 guys. I've got Ja, I've got Jaren, I've got Dez. Marcus Smart and 5 first-round picks for Lauri Markkanen. If I thought it would fit roster-wise, it's hard to not say that makes Memphis a championship contender, right? Like, I think that's worth pondering. I don't know that I would do it because that's a hell of a lot of draft capital. But just the fact that Memphis was brought up in these discussions, what do you think of Markkanen's fit? I'm not positive. If they were willing to give up that many picks for Mikal Bridges, that's the one thing that makes me pause, Damichael. If they were willing to part with 4 first-round picks, which is the documented report from numerous sources, that was one of the offers that was made. It was either for Bridges or Kevin Durant. They've shown the capacity to offer that type of capital.
Yeah.
Is that worth it for Lauri Markkanen in your view?
So let's circle back to the idea of Markkanen in Memphis. And
the theory.
And here's the point. That the thing to take away from this, I think, and it's something I've said before, and it's one of those things that people don't actually love to hear, but it's the truth. The idea that Jaren Jackson Jr. will be the Grizzlies starting center at the beginning of next season or the beginning of this upcoming season is still not a moot point. Jaren Jackson Jr. very well, still, even with Zach Edey on this roster, even with Brandon Clark on the roster, it's very realistic that Jaren Jackson Jr. is the starting center for the Memphis Grizzlies.
That's a great point.
You gotta remember that part when you think about why would they pursue a Lauri Markkanen. The Grizzlies are not married to the idea that Jaren is the power forward. They're married to the idea that he's a starter in the front court and he's a big core piece of the future. But that does not mean that he's the power forward of the future. So that's where the Markkanen interest in my mind makes the most sense. And that brings us to a bigger point of the idea that me and you've talked about a lot. Is Jaren a 4? Is he a 5? And all of that. But that's where I think the conversation starts. I'm not saying that Jaren will be the starting center at the beginning of this upcoming season or whatever the case may be, because, again, we talked about the idea that the Grizzlies need to add more depth at center in free agency whenever they can, free up a roster spot or whatever the case may be. And in that case, Zach Edey could potentially be your starting center. Or they could say, hey, he's a rookie. We're going to start Jaren at center at the beginning of the year, give him some backup minutes, and we'll see where we are in January. Like, that's very well a possible situation here. That's where I think the Markkanen fit, the idea of him joining the team comes into play, with the idea that the Grizzlies are saying, if we put Jaren at center, who are some of the guys that make sense to get us over the hump? You're right. I don't see them playing him at power forward, not the way the Grizzlies play or whatnot, if there was real interest there. And you're right. It would also take a haul, not only because Lauri Markkanen is, one of the better, I guess you could say, young stars at his position in the game, but Danny Ainge. And you do your research on Danny Ainge. He's the reason right now that Boston is part of he's a big reason why Boston is in the position that it was, because people forget that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were top 5 picks back-to-back years, off picks acquired by the Celtics, not picks from the Celtics just being a terrible team. And those picks were from the Brooklyn Nets when they traded Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce at pretty much close to the end of their careers. So Danny Ainge is going to get his. You're not going to get over on Danny Ainge. It just doesn't happen. So he's one of those guys I tend to say, hey, stay away from him unless you got a nice, likable deal. But Lauri Markkanen is a nice piece. I'm not really sure about the idea of him in Memphis because of the fact that Jaren would be the center. I don't really love that idea. But I mean, if you got Lauri Markkanen, I mean, if you had the opportunity to get him, if the Jazz even listened and said, okay, let's keep talking, I do think you pick up the phone and you say, hey, let's talk through this.
The thing that makes me the most nervous about Markkanen, we've talked a lot about this first apron, second apron, those sorts of things. If you bring in Markkanen, he's on the last year of his deal, right? So
you're a second apron team.
You're going to be a second apron team, and you're assuming that you're keeping all of these guys. Robert Parra is one of the richest owners in the NBA. I haven't checked the rankings lately. He was top 5 recently. Like Steve Ballmer's in a class all by himself, which is why we talk about the apron rules. Like if the second apron didn't exist, most of these guys might be playing for the Clippers.
Steve Ballmer is scared of the second apron. What does that tell you?
That's exactly right. He ain't scared about spending money. He's scared of the second apron. I think that the biggest thing for me is it makes sense if you're going all in this year, right? I think it makes sense if you want to say, okay, Marcus Smart, 25, 27, 29, 31, all unprotected first-round picks. Say no to that, Utah. And then Ainge calls back and he goes, actually, that's fair. We'll do it. And you're like, oh, crap. He actually said yes, right? And now you've got a starting five of Morant, Bane, G.G. Jackson / Vince Williams Jr., take your pick, Lauri Markkanen, Jaren Jackson Jr., with a bench that includes a Luke Kennard and a Zach Edey now as your sixth man big. Imagine Markkanen playing next to Edey as well as Jaren playing next to Edey. Imagine the front court. Brandon Clark is your fourth big, right? Like that. You've got four legitimate potential all-stars, guys that have played at that level at some point in their careers on the same starting lineup. That makes you a championship contender in a tough Western Conference right now. But what comes next, right? Jaren Jackson Jr. is due for a contract extension. He's not going to come cheap. You have to re-sign Markkanen, otherwise you gave up and mortgaged your future for essentially nothing, right? So you're going to be a second apron team, and you better hope to all that's good that those guys that are on your roster currently are able to supplement, because if they're not, you just lost every single path to build around them.
There's your future. Yeah.
Your future is those four dudes. That's a bold strategy. That's a major bet to make. So that's why I would say it would, on paper, if you're playing NBA 2K, you do that trade, right? Let's go play. Let's go ball. When you are managing a $1 billion plus team and franchise, and you are trying to figure out how to keep a team in the smallest market in the NBA successful for the long term, that is a serious conversation that you have to have in terms of, is it worth mortgaging your future to be a team that, if that trade happened, maybe you put Denver in front of Memphis, but I think Memphis is the second favorite in the Western Conference. Maybe OKC, maybe. But that's also part of the point. Even with that, there's still teams that you can make a legitimate argument that would be better than the Grizzlies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to pull. Now, at the same time,
we're talking about a 5-out offense. That'd be pretty awesome to watch.
They'd be fun. Like, I mean, I talk about the shooting struggles with this team. I mean, you get a sniper like Lauri Markkanen to go in that lineup with Desmond Bane. We don't got to talk about that anymore. We don't have to talk about the shooting struggle. They'd be one of the most explosive offenses in the NBA, and John Morant would go to another level. So I'm not really opposed to the idea of seeing what that looks like. I'm opposed to, sounds like what you're saying too, the idea of that kind of the limitations that it puts on you in the future, because there are certain limitations that are naturally going to come, because next offseason around this time, a little bit before this time, we'll be talking about a Jaren Jackson Jr. contract extension and what that looks like. And then the year after that, there's going to be another contract extension. Well, 2 years after that, we're going to be talking about Jaws. And then the year after that, it's going to be Dez. But the Jaren one is the big one, because Ja and Dez already got max deals that are going to be about 25% of the cap. And with the case of Jaren Jackson Jr., he's probably going to be 25% or even more of the cap, which hasn't been the case since he has this de-escalating contract. So it's going to be real interesting to see how the future of the Grizzlies shakes out. But the idea of Lauri Markkanen kind of probably made sense once upon a time. I don't really see the Grizzlies making that move, especially with what they're trying to. I mean, again, I said it earlier. This is a roster that's close to championship level, and they're not even in the first apron. I don't think you have to do all of that and put these limitations on yourself to win a championship.
I think you nailed it. I think that they explored the market and stuff when maybe they were a little more unsure about Ja, or Jaren's not doing what they wanted. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that makes more sense. You hear more and more analysts talking about, like Bobby Marks of ESPN, who hopefully we'll have on once things calm down in the offseason. The way that teams are starting to look at it is you have two max guys, right? And then it's complementary guys around that, because you want to avoid that second apron at all costs. What does that mean for Jaren Jackson Jr.? Right? Like, that's going to be something that's going to bear watching. Maybe Memphis, again, they zag when everybody else zigs. Right. So maybe Memphis says, you know what, screw it. We're going to go 75% of our cap in these three dudes, and we're just going to have draft picks, and we're going to try to build around them and and see if we can do the best that we can. It's going to be fascinating to watch how other teams build with these new rules. And the Grizzlies are walking through that just like anybody else. So let us know what you think in the comments. Lauri Markkanen, probably not going to be a Memphis Grizzly, but it's fun to dream. And like I said, Adrian Wojnarowski bringing his name up, that carries a little bit of weight. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I do believe a phone call was made at some point. Thank you so much for being with us on this Wednesday edition of the show. It's the 4th of July, the next time that we're together, and we're going to talk about some NBA fireworks, some more updates on NBA free agency, maybe an early take on who's gotten better, who's gotten worse, that sort of stuff. And, again, maybe the rosters will be out for Summer League, and we can go a little bit more in depth with what we're working with here, partner.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Looking forward to that. And, looking forward to seeing what other pieces they put on the roster as well. I think the guys that we've covered pretty much are the main names to watch for it. And also, Zach he's not 100% on the roster at this point. So to actually see his name listed on the roster, that's going to be confirmation to what, many people believe at this point is that he will be on the roster, but it has not been stated yet or reported yet that he's on the roster. So
it's true.
That's going to be something worth watching as well.
That would be a very Grizzlies thing to do, is convince him to not play for Team Canada. And then they say, he doesn't need to play Summer League.
Yeah, we got Trey Jemison. Trey Jemison, you're the starting center for the Summer League Grizzlies.
There's Zach Edey sitting on the bench in Vegas instead of getting ready for the Olympics. That would be quite a kick in the pants. But again, these Memphis Grizzlies, you never know with these guys. So it's going to be a great show on the 4th of July before you go to your cookout, whatever the case might be. Celebrate with Damichael and I heading into our 4th of July episode. Thank you so much for being with us today. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, as well as Amazon Fire, free TV channels app. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Continue to make Locked On Grizzlies part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. For Damichael, I am Joe. Thank you once again. We will catch you on the 4th of July. We appreciate each and every one of you that have spent some of your day with us here at Locked On Grizzlies. We hope you will do so again tomorrow. See you then.